My name is Maren Voss. I was 37 years old, the night my parents locked me out of my own home. Not their home. Not some childhood bedroom I had overstayed my welcome in. Mine. The brick ranch house on Maple Lantern Drive had my name on the deed, my money in its walls, and 19 months of my life buried in the paperwork my parents never bothered to read. I came home at 11:48 on a Thursday night after a hospital compliance audit that should have ended 3 hours earlier. My eyes burned from staring at billing codes, my feet hurt, and all I wanted was to check on my daughter, Callie, kiss her forehead, and stand under a hot shower long enough to feel human again. The porch light was on, but something felt wrong before I even reached the door. 3 black trash bags sat beside the welcome mat. One had split open, spilling my sweaters across the concrete. Callie's purple backpack leaned against the planter, her crayons scattered under it like someone had shaken out a piece of her little life and walked away. I punched in my code. The keypad flashed red. I tried again, slower this time. Well, through the front window, I could see the light on in my bedroom. Except it wasn't my bedroom anymore. My bed was gone. Callie's small bookshelf was gone. In its place sat a crib still half wrapped in plastic, a stack of diaper boxes, and my brother Dawson's duffel bag on the chair where I used to fold laundry. Then my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Dawson and Maribel need the house now. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stood there under the porch light, holding my keys to a door that no longer answered me. I didn't knock. I didn't scream. Because what my parents forgot was simple. I read documents for a living. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet you're watching this video right now while lying down with your legs crossed, right? If that's true, type 3. If not, type 4. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. So I did what I had trained myself to do long before that night. I made the moment measurable. I recorded the porch exactly as they had left it. The bags, the lock, the timestamp, the message from my mother sitting on my screen like she had typed it with clean hands. I didn't touch the clothes yet. I didn't pick up Callie's backpack. I knew better than to fix the scene before I had proof of what had been broken. Callie wasn't inside, and that was the one mercy I kept thanking God for under my breath. My audit had been scheduled to run late, so Camille Reed, my supervisor and the closest thing I had to a sane adult in my life, had agreed to keep her overnight. At the time, it had felt like a simple favor. Standing outside that locked door, I realized it had saved my daughter from watching her grandparents erase us in real time. Only after I filmed the keypad refusing my code did I leave the driveway. I drove to Camille's with both hands tight on the wheel, not because I was afraid I would crash, but because I was afraid I might turn around and start begging people who had planned this while I was at work. Camille opened the door before I even knocked twice. She looked at my face. Then, at the grocery bag of Callie's things I had managed to grab from the porch, and stepped aside without asking for a performance. By 12:17 a.m., Callie was asleep in Camille's blue guest room, one sock still on, one sock kicked somewhere under the blanket. I stood in the doorway for a moment and let myself breathe. She was safe. That came first. Everything else could wait its turn. Then I sat at Camille's kitchen table, opened my laptop, and made a list. Not a diary. Not a message to my mother. A file. The lock. The text. The removed belongings. The altered bedroom visible through the window. The deed. The occupancy agreement. The bank transfers totaling $61,050. The attorney who handled the transfer 19 months earlier. I wrote each item down the way I would in a compliance review, because panic has never won a case for anyone. Camille placed a mug of coffee beside me and said quietly, "Maren, audit them." So I did. And while my parents slept inside the house they thought they had taken back, the paperwork they had ignored was already turning against them. Before sunrise, they would learn that a locked door works both ways. 19 months earlier, the papers that saved me had started on a Tuesday evening with my mother crying at the kitchen table and my father staring at the foreclosure notice, like silence could make a bank change its mind. The house on Maple Lantern Drive was not impressive to anyone who had not lived inside it. A brick ranch from 1959. Low roof, narrow hallway, oak cabinets that stuck whenever the air turned damp. In winter, the front window whistled. In summer, the basement smelled faintly like rain, even when the sky had been clear for days. But it was where my father had taught me to ride a bike in the driveway. It was where Callie had taken her first steps from the couch to the coffee table. It was not valuable because it was beautiful. It was valuable because people I loved had taught me to confuse memory with obligation. Greta called me that night, using the voice she saved for emergencies and guilt. "We're going to lose it, Maren," she said. "Not the house. It." As if naming it would make the foreclosure notice breathe louder. When I got there, the numbers were already spread across the table. 5 months behind on the mortgage. Property taxes unpaid. Penalties stacked on penalties. A sale date circled in red. Lowell sat beside her with both hands around a mug he had not touched, letting my mother fall apart loudly enough for both of them. Dawson's name was not on the notice, but his fingerprints were all over the damage. Equipment loans. Personal loans. Cash advances my parents called temporary help. A repair business that had lasted 18 months and left behind nothing but invoices, excuses, and a son they still described as unlucky instead of irresponsible. I added it up on a yellow legal pad. $41,700 in mortgage arrears. $12,950 in taxes and late fees. $6,400 for the attorney, title, cleanup, and filing costs. $61,050 to keep the house from going to sale. I had saved that money after my divorce for a place where Callie and I would never have to wonder who could ask us to leave. Instead, I used it to save the house everyone kept calling ours, but I did not wire money on a promise. The attorney handled it through a title company. The arrears were cleared first. The deed transfer was prepared, notarized, recorded, and tied to a written occupancy agreement that let my parents stay in the guest suite as long as they respected the owner's access and did not move anyone else in without written permission. Greta signed through tears. Lowell barely read past the first page. "This keeps the bank away?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and under that humming kitchen light, I understood something they did not. The papers were not only keeping the bank away, they were keeping me from being erased by the people I was saving. For a while after that, my parents were grateful in the careful way people are grateful when they do not want to name what you actually did for them. My mother called me her blessing at church. My father told the neighbor across the street that I had stepped up. They let people believe I had helped with a rough month, because help sounded smaller than ownership, and ownership made them uncomfortable. They had lived in that house for so long that the deed, to them, felt like a technicality. The rooms still held their furniture. Their mail still came through the slot. My mother still kept her grocery coupons in the drawer beside the stove. My father still sat in the same recliner every evening with the remote balanced on his stomach. So in their minds, nothing had changed, except the bank had gone quiet. They forgot that silence from a bank does not mean silence from a county recorder. What changed was the way Dawson's name started filling every conversation again. He needed time, patience, and a chance to rebuild. That was how my parents said it. What they meant was that everyone else had to keep paying for his collapses until one finally looked like a comeback. When his repair business failed, my mother blamed the economy. When creditors called, my father said stress could break any man. When his marriage cracked and Maribel came back into the picture pregnant, they treated that baby like proof Dawson deserved a clean slate. I understood wanting a child to have stability. I was raising one, but no one looked at Callie and used that word. My daughter was 6, old enough in their minds to be flexible, which is what families say when they mean a child is easier to move than a grown man's pride. The first real warning came at Sunday dinner. My mother set a casserole on the table, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and said, "Dawson and Maribel are going to take the master bedroom. You and Callie can move downstairs for a little while." She said it as if she were telling me rain was coming. I waited for my father to correct her. He cut into his chicken instead. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, This is my house. My father's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His face changed, not into surprise, but offense, as if I had dragged something vulgar into a family meal. Don't talk about family like a contract, he said. I looked up at the light over the table, the same light that had hummed above their signatures 19 months earlier. Only people protected by contracts can afford to hate them. The Thursday it happened began with the kind of wrongness you only recognize fully after it has already cost you something. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no slammed doors. Just my mother being too pleasant over coffee, my father moving through the garage before sunrise, and Dawson's truck parked along the curb when he was supposed to be 2 towns over helping Maribel with a doctor's appointment. A white moving pod sat half in the driveway, its metal sides catching the early light. When I asked about it, Greta did not even turn from the sink. Maribel has some baby things coming, she said. Don't start. That was how my mother ended conversations she had already finished in her head. Lowell kept shifting cardboard boxes from one side of the garage to the other without labeling any of them. That bothered me more than it should have. My father labeled everything. Christmas lights, furnace filters, old tax returns. If a box had no label, it meant he did not want anyone asking what was inside. By afternoon, I had to leave for the hospital. The Medicare billing review had been rescheduled twice, and Camille was already keeping Callie overnight because my shift might run past midnight. As I buckled Callie into the back seat, she looked toward the house and frowned. Are my books still going to be there when we come home? She asked. I paused with my hand on the seat belt. Of course they are, I said, because I still believed there were lines even my parents would not cross. She nodded, but not like she was reassured, like she was deciding whether to say more. I kissed her forehead and drove away from Maple Lantern Drive, with the moving pod in my rearview mirror and a feeling in my chest I filed under later because work was waiting. That is what responsible women do too often. We see the warning light, and we keep driving because someone else needs us to be on time. At 11:48 that night, I came back. The pod door was half open now. One of Callie's clear storage bins sat just inside it, the pink label with her name facing the street. Through the front window, I saw enough to understand without needing the whole room. A moon-shaped nursery lamp glowed where my reading lamp used to be. A stack of diaper boxes leaned against the wall. Dawson's jacket hung over my chair like a flag. Then Lowell's text arrived. This is still our family home. Stay with Camille for a few nights until you calm down. That was when I understood the message had been written before I ever pulled into the driveway. They had planned the wound, then prepared the story they would tell about my reaction. By the time I got back to Camille's house, the anger had settled into something quieter and more useful. The kind of quiet I trusted. Callie was asleep down the hall, one sock still on, one sock kicked somewhere under the blanket, and for a minute I stood in the doorway just watching her breathe. My parents could argue about bedrooms, paperwork, and family all they wanted. My first job was making sure my daughter never had to feel unsafe because adults were too proud to tell the truth. I returned to Camille's kitchen, opened my laptop, and uploaded what I already had. The photos, the video, Lowell's text, the deed, the occupancy agreement, the title email. I did not spend long staring at any of it. I knew the shape of my own evidence. What I needed next was something my parents could not rewrite, soften, or explain away as my attitude. Someone else's eyes. I texted Tess Holloway across the street, apologizing for the hour and asking if she had seen anything unusual that day. Less than a minute later, my phone rang. I wondered when you'd ask, Tess said, her voice rough but awake. That told me enough to sit straighter. Tess had worked county dispatch for 27 years before retiring. She noticed time, vehicles, tones of voice. The small details people forget become important later. She told me the moving pod arrived before noon. Dawson and Lowell carried boxes into the garage a little after 2. At 4:15, a locksmith van pulled up and parked directly in front of the house. Greta stood on the porch with her arms folded while the man worked on the front door. Not the side door? I asked, because my mother had been careful to mention the side door earlier. No, Tess said. Front door. I watched him test the keypad twice. I wrote it down exactly. Not almost. Not close enough. Exactly. Then Tess added one more thing. Around 5, she saw my father carry 2 of Callie's storage bins to the moving pod. He looked up and down the street first, like a man checking whether shame had witnesses. I asked if she would be willing to put it in a statement. There was a pause, but not a doubtful one. Your mother will say you're exaggerating, Tess said. I know. Then I'll write what I saw. When we hung up, I added her name to the file. Not as ammunition, as a witness. Revenge needs a target. A record only needs the truth to stay still long enough for somebody else to read it. The next morning, my parents did what people do when they know the facts are not on their side. They got to the audience first. By 8 o'clock, my phone was lighting up with messages from relatives who had not asked where Callie and I had slept. Aunt Lorna wrote, "Your mother is beside herself. Don't turn this into a legal mess over one room." A cousin I saw twice a year sent, "Dawson has a baby coming. Sometimes family means sacrifice." Someone from my mother's church, a woman who had once brought Callie a coloring book after Sunday service, wrote, "Your parents gave you a home. Please don't repay them with cruelty." I read each message while standing in Camille's kitchen, waiting for toast to pop up. The normalness of that sound almost broke me. Bread warming. My daughter humming in the next room. My family turning me into the villain before breakfast. I did not answer them. I took screenshots instead. Then Dawson posted the photo. He was standing in my bedroom with Maribel beside him, both of them smiling like they had just closed on a starter home. Behind them, the moon nursery lamp glowed softly. Diaper boxes were stacked near the wall. Above Dawson's shoulder, faint but visible, were Callie's glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling. The caption read, "Finally getting our little family settled before baby Voss arrives. Grateful for parents who still believe in helping their kids." I stared at the word kids longer than I should have, as if I had stopped being one the moment I became useful. I was still holding the phone when Callie walked in, dragging her stuffed fox by one ear. She looked at the screen before I could turn it off. "That's our room," she said. I crouched beside her. "Did Grandma say something about the room?" Callie pressed her lips together, the way children do when they are trying to remember which adult they are allowed to disappoint. "She said it was a surprise," she whispered. "She said not to tell you because you'd get upset and make it hard for Uncle Dawson." The room went very still around me. Not because I was shocked anymore. Shock needs innocence, and mine was already gone. But because there is a difference between lying to me and teaching my daughter to help carry the lie. I set the phone face down on the counter and took both of Callie's hands. "Listen to me," I said gently. "No grown-up gets to ask you to keep secrets from me. Not Grandma, not Grandpa, not anyone." She nodded, solemn and small. Then she asked if we could have pancakes. So I made pancakes. And after she ate, I added one more line to the file. They had made my child part of the plan. By 9:30, Callie was drawing at Camille's dining room table with syrup still on the corner of her mouth, and I was sitting in my car outside Jonah Price's office with a folder on my lap that felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. Jonah worked out of the second floor of an old building above a tax preparer and a dentist. No marble lobby, no receptionist with a headset, just a narrow staircase, a frosted glass door, and a man in rolled-up sleeves who looked like he had spent 20 years telling people truths they did not want to hear. He did not waste time comforting me, which I appreciated. Comfort has its place. At that moment, I needed someone fluent in consequences. He read quietly. First the deed, then the occupancy agreement, then the title confirmation, the bank records, the screenshots, the photos, Tess's timeline, and the message from my father telling me to stay elsewhere until I calmed down. That was the one that made Jonah pause. Not because it was the cruelest thing in the file, but because it was the cleanest. He tapped the printed page with one finger. "They put it in writing that they denied you access." I said nothing. I had learned that when a professional finds the sentence that matters, you let them sit with it. Jonah leaned back in his chair and took off his glasses. Maren, they didn't lock a daughter out of her parents' house, he said. They locked the owner out of her own property. The words landed hard, even though I already knew them. Maybe because hearing someone else say it made it stop sounding like betrayal and start sounding like a case. He explained the steps in the same calm voice. First, formal notice restoring owner access. Second, a request for police civil standby so no one could turn the entry into a family screaming match. Third, documentation of the occupancy violation because the agreement did not allow them to change locks, deny access, or move Dawson and Maribel in without written permission. Fourth, a title check to see whether my parents had tried to do anything else with the house. I looked up at that. Anything else? Jonah gave me the kind of look adults give when they do not want to be the one to take your last bit of hope. They changed the locks on a house they don't own, he said. We should assume that wasn't the only bad decision. I thought of Callie's stars on the ceiling. Dawson's caption. My mother's perfect church voice moving faster than the truth. For the first time since the keypad flashed red, I did not feel locked out. I felt late to a fight my paperwork had already started winning. Jonah said he would run the title check that afternoon, and I remember thinking there could not possibly be anything left to find. That is the strange mercy of betrayal. Your mind tries to put a floor under it. It tells you, this is the bottom, because believing there might be more feels too expensive. At 3:18 p.m., Jonah called while I was standing in Camille's backyard, watching Callie push a plastic dinosaur through a patch of clover. His voice was flat, professional, and that told me before the words did. We found why they needed you gone, he said. I closed the sliding door behind me so Callie would not hear my breathing change. A title officer named Maeve Rios had flagged an application that morning. Greta and Lowell had tried to open a home equity line of credit against Maple Lantern Drive. $85,000. The stated purpose was home improvements and family support, which sounded almost respectable until you understood my family's language. Home improvements meant making space for Dawson. Family support meant paying for whatever hole Dawson had dug and called bad luck. The application had not gone far. It could not. The title search showed my name where theirs used to be. The deed transfer from 19 months earlier was recorded. The current insurance policy was mine. The payment structure was tied to me. Without my signature, the house could not be borrowed against, refinanced, or quietly used as a rescue fund for my brother's next collapse. For a second, I looked through Camille's kitchen window at my daughter crouched in the grass, making dinosaur noises to herself, safe and unaware. Then I thought about my parents moving her books, the storage bins, the nursery lamp, the text telling me to calm down. I had been treating the lockout like a cruel decision made under pressure. It was worse than that. It was a step. They needed me physically out of the house so they could make it look, to themselves and maybe to everyone else, as if I had already given up my place in it. If I was gone, if my room was Dawson's, if Maribel was settled in, if relatives believed I had chosen to stay away, then asking me to sign something later could be dressed up as one more family favor. Jonah stayed quiet while I caught up to the shape of it. They were going to ask for my signature, I said, or pressure you for it, he answered. There's a difference on paper, but not always in a kitchen. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because every bad thing in my family had always happened in a kitchen first. I looked at the folder on Camille's counter, then at Callie outside, still playing in the afternoon light. Put the house back in my control before sunrise, I said. Jonah did not ask if I was sure. He only said, I'll make the calls. Jonah made the calls, and by 5:20, the next morning, Maple Lantern Drive looked almost peaceful. That was the part that bothered me most. The sky was still dark at the edges. A thin gray line had started behind the rooftops, and the streetlights made the wet pavement shine like nothing ugly had ever happened there. My parents' houseplants were still lined up in the front window. The maple tree still leaned over the driveway. From the outside, It looked like an ordinary home before breakfast. Then Officer Malcolm Finch pulled up behind Jonah's car, stepped out with a paper cup of coffee, and asked for my identification. He was not there to take sides. He made that clear immediately. Police civil standby, Jonah had explained, meant exactly what it sounded like: an officer standing by while a lawful owner restored access so nobody could turn a property issue into a family emergency. Officer Finch read my driver's license, the recorded deed, the occupancy agreement, and Jonah's notice with the tired patience of a man who had seen relatives do terrible things with excellent excuses. Finally, he handed the papers back. "Ma'am," he said, "as long as the locksmith is acting under your authorization, we're here to keep the peace." Peace. I almost smiled at that word. My parents had used it my whole life to mean my silence. The locksmith arrived at 5:31 inches, a gray van, with no logo on the side. Jonah had chosen someone outside our neighborhood, someone my parents had not already charmed or instructed. The man checked my ID, matched it to the deed, and went to work without asking why a woman needed to break into a house she owned. He opened the panel, tested the keypad, and frowned. "Your code was deleted," he said. "New master code was created yesterday." "Under what name?" Jonah asked. The locksmith looked at the screen. "Lowell." I felt that name settle in my stomach, heavy but not surprising. By 5:47, the unauthorized codes were wiped. By 5:50, a new code answered to me. The lock clicked open with one clean sound, no drama, no apology, just a mechanism recognizing the right instruction. Then, headlights swept across the garage door. Dawson's truck turned into the driveway, followed by my parents' sedan. Maribel sat in the passenger seat with a travel mug in both hands. Dawson got out first, annoyed before he understood why. He strode to the door and punched in the code. "Rel." He tried again harder, as if pressure changed numbers. "Rel." My mother stepped out of the sedan slowly, looking from the officer to Jonah to me. "What is this?" she asked. I stood beside the front door, exhausted, steady, and finally inside the boundary they had tried to erase. "Access control," I said. Greta looked at me like she was waiting for the daughter version of me to step forward, the one who apologized before anyone explained why she was wrong. When that woman did not appear, my mother's face changed. The softness went first, then the shock. What remained was fear, dressed as outrage. "Your father's medication is inside," she said, and for 1 second I heard the trap in it. Not because the medication was not real, it was. Lowell had taken blood pressure pills for years, but my mother knew exactly where to place need so I would feel cruel for enforcing a boundary. I turned to Officer Finch. "Can he retrieve necessary medication and personal items under supervision?" The officer nodded. "That's reasonable." Greta blinked, as if reasonableness offended her more than anger would have. I opened the door, not wide, just enough. Lowell stepped in first, slower than usual, avoiding my eyes. His shoulders looked smaller in the hallway than they ever had at the dinner table. Officer Finch followed him toward the guest suite. Jonah stayed near the entry. I stood between my mother and the rest of the house. Dawson tried to move past me with a cardboard box in his hands. "No," I said. He stopped like the word had hit his chest. "I need my stuff. You can take personal belongings. You are not moving in. You are not moving anything else into this house." His face flushed. "You're really doing this with a cop here?" "No," I said. "I'm doing this because you all made sure there had to be one." Maribel said nothing. She stood near the driveway with one hand under her belly, looking more embarrassed than angry. For the first time, I wondered how much Dawson had promised her and how little he had explained. Greta stepped close enough that I could smell her peppermint gum. "After everything we did for you," she whispered. There it was. The sentence families keep polished for emergencies. I looked past her at the living room, at the boxes stacked against my wall, at Callie's books shoved sideways on a shelf that had never belonged to Dawson. "No, Mom," I said, "after everything I paid to save." Across the street, Tess Holloway stood on her porch in a robe, arms crossed, watching quietly. She did not wave. She did not need to. Her presence was its own statement. For 27 minutes, they carried out what was theirs. Medicine, wallets, clothes, laptops, a hospital bag. Nothing more. When the last box crossed the threshold, I closed the door gently, not to punish them, to prove it, finally answered to me. The days after that were quieter than people imagine justice will be. No dramatic apology came. No family meeting where everyone admitted what they had done. Jonah sent the formal notices, and my parents responded the way they had always responded when consequences arrived wearing someone else's letterhead. Greta cried to anyone who would listen. Lowell said very little. Dawson posted nothing for 3 days, which, for him, was almost a confession. The home equity application died before it ever became money. Maeve Rios at the title company confirmed in writing that no loan could move forward without my authorization, and I did not authorize it. The moving pod disappeared from the driveway by the end of the week. Dawson and Maribel found a rental across town, smaller than what he had promised her, but honest in the one way that mattered. My name was not on it. My parents left the guest suite within the legal window Jonah gave them. They did not go easily. My mother sent one message calling me cold. My father sent one saying I had changed. I read both, then saved them in the folder, and did not answer. Maybe I had changed. Or maybe I had simply stopped confusing access to me with love for me. For a while, the family version traveled faster than the truth. I had thrown out my aging parents. I had punished my pregnant sister-in-law. I had let paperwork matter more than blood. But stories like that have short legs when records start walking. Tess had seen the locksmith. Officer Finch had filed his report. Jonah had the deed, the agreement, and the title search. Camille had seen my daughter asleep in a borrowed bed because the people who called themselves family had made our home unsafe. I did not need to shout over my mother's story. I only needed to stop helping her tell it. 3 weeks later, Callie and I moved back into Maple Lantern Drive for good. The house felt strange at first, like it was holding its breath. I cleaned slowly. I moved Dawson's boxes out of my room. I peeled the nursery sticker from the window and left Callie's glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling because she asked me to. Then I changed the lock one final time. Callie stood beside me in her socks, serious as a judge, while I set the new code. When it was done, I let her try it first. Her small fingers pressed the numbers carefully. The keypad flashed green. The door opened. She looked up at me and smiled. "Mom," she said, "it knows us." I looked past her into the quiet house, at the morning light falling across the old floor, and felt something inside me finally unclench. No, I thought. This time, it knew who owned the door. What this taught me is that family should never be a place where love is used as leverage. A home is not only walls, a roof, a deed, or a keypad on the door. A home is the place where a child should feel safe walking in with her backpack. It is the place where a tired woman should not have to prove she belongs after spending years holding everyone else together. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that the people who taught you the word family may also be the people who use it to make you smaller. Maren's story is not just about a house, it is about what happens when kindness is mistaken for permission. She helped because she loved them. She paid because she cared. She stayed calm because she had spent her whole life being told that being strong meant not making trouble. But strength is not the same as silence. Forgiveness is not the same as handing someone the keys to hurt you again. And peace is not real peace if it only exists because one person keeps swallowing the truth. There comes a moment when you have to stop explaining your pain to people who benefit from misunderstanding it. You have to stop letting guilt dress itself up as love. You have to stop believing that setting a boundary makes you cruel. Sometimes a boundary is the first honest thing a family has seen in years. The deepest lesson here is simple. Love should protect your door, not lock you outside of it. If someone only values you when you are useful, that is not love. If someone calls you selfish for protecting what you built, that is not family. And if you have spent years being the strong one, maybe it is time to ask who keeps handing you the weight. Maren did not win because she was cold. She won because she finally stopped abandoning herself. What would you have done in Maren's place? Would you have opened the door, walked away, or taken it to court? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched something real in you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember that boundaries are not betrayal.